I'm just going to give an overview for a few minutes, and then we'll split into two halves. Jack will go through the process of what's involved with inspections and eradication and the like, and I'm going to talk about background of feet first and a few key features of foot rot. I guess the key element just up front is to work out on your property, if you've got an issue, to work out exactly what it is and make a rational plan on that basis. Now, there's a lot of foot rot around, but there's differentiating between what is a benign strain and a more virulent strain is what the critical issue is, because there's quite different management. And also there's a lot of that uncertainty and stress involved with foot rot as well. Foot rot's caused by, there's one bacteria which causes it, but there's heaps of different strains of that bacteria, which they don't swap between strains, but the fact is that a lot of properties where they've got a foot rot on, they'll have more than one or two strains on there, but the disease will present as what the most virulent strain of foot rot is. So sometimes when you go through eradication, you might get left with a benign strain, which are a lot more difficult to eradicate afterwards. In terms of a couple of key elements, that the bacteria survives for no more than 7 days off sheep. So if you had foot rotty sheep down a laneway, if you wait for 7 days under all climatic conditions, that will be sufficient time to walk clean sheep up that laneway. Now, there might be in hot, dry conditions that'll be less, but we just have a not negotiable position of 7 days, okay? The worst that's been shown up to about 6 days or 5 or 6 days under ideal conditions, survival off the feet, but we just say 7 days in all circumstances to keep it safe, okay? So if you've had stray sheep from the neighbours into a paddock and you want to put sheep in that paddock, after removing those sheep, wait for 7 days and so on. Look, and if you've got virulent foot rot, it can be very costly. It can cost up to $4 or $5 a year to live with it. It can cost up to $10 or more in the year per sheep to eradicate it, but that's a one-off cost, hopefully. And in our experiences, and I've done a lot of work with Jacko over the years, I reckon sort of 80% success in year one, all else being equal, would be about right, wouldn't it, Jack? So, I mean, if you do things right, follow the program, you've got good chance of success. But sometimes the season beats you, sometimes not everything's set up right to start with. So just be wary, it's really important. How the disease expresses on sheep really depends on the strain of the bacteria and that spectrum of virulence between different strains. And also there's a bit of sheep susceptibility differences, and the main thing is breed. Merinos are obviously more susceptible than British breed type sheep. Things like Dorpers, in my experience, are really susceptible to it. It probably makes sense because they've come from a desert type environment, so probably no selection pressure on that factor in terms of foot rot. The black-footed sheep can still get foot rot, but not as severely as what your Merinos can. And there's minimal age-related immunity as well. So, and once sheep have had foot rot, they can still get it again. So you don't get that immunity like what's with some diseases. Once they get it, they won't get it again because they're immune. It doesn't work with foot rot. And obviously the other thing which is really important is environment. The rainfall, wet conditions, temperature. So if you get more than 50 mils a month over the cooler months, then if the average daily temperature is above 10 degrees Celsius, you'll get spread. So typically in northern Victoria, you'll get spread at a low level through most of winter if you've had a decent autumn break. Down in southern Victoria, unless it's a really early autumn break, you don't seem to get much spread during winter because it's just a bit too cold. The average temperature is below that 10 degrees Celsius. The further north you go, the more likely you are to get spread. But the reality is most spread happens, the big part of it is in spring, and typically from August onwards things start to move as it just warms up a bit. Daily temperature 10 degrees Celsius. And obviously the foot rot can spread further with a wetter area, a lusher, longer growing season, the disease can look worse. So, and even the lower grade strains start to look worse down in southern areas, whereas up in the north it doesn't look bad because the growing season's shorter and it just doesn't have a chance to express itself fully. So transmission, sheep and goats can absolutely carry foot rot, survives in the feet indefinitely. If the individual infected ones are not removed. Goats, it's a bit different in terms of some of the strains look virulent in sheep, don't look so bad in goats. So just be wary of that, but they can still carry it. Cattle can carry benign strains indefinitely, but in our experience, they don't carry virulent strains for any length of time, except for as a very short-term carriage as a passive carrier just for a short period, but it doesn't establish in the feet for a long period of time. But just be wary, when you buy cattle on, if they've been mixed with other sheep on another place, just put them in isolation for at least a couple of weeks after they come on your place, is what I have as a policy. And during eradication programs in summer, it's not a big deal. It doesn't mean you don't eradicate because over summer foot rot's not spreading anyway. That's when you do your diagnosis, your eradication. In terms of there's a line between benign and virulent, and benign strains really, apart from giving you a heart flutter every time you find feet with a lesion, and it causes a little bit of a production loss, which a simple bit of foot bathing might be enough to all that's needed. But if you're doing a lot of foot bathing with benign foot rot, then I think you probably need to revisit the original diagnosis. You're either foot bathing too much or it's a more virulent strain than what you're thinking. And obviously there's a spectrum of virulence where it goes from a low-grade strain, just a little bit more than benign, up to highly virulent strains where it's very easy to make a decision to eradicate here. It's more difficult when it's around this level here. Okay, it comes down to more a sheep trading issue. I mean, in terms of you're really effectively, if you're above this line, you're in self-imposed quarantine and selling straight to slaughter rather than, although some people still sell through ignorance as much as anything through sale yards when they've got above that line sometimes. So, but in terms of, and the cut-off, and I'm going to talk about foot scores after we split up, but ultimately it's if you've got more than 1% score 4, so under ideal conditions, that's a strain which is likely to be virulent, and if it's only up to 1% score 4s, we generally term it benign. But you've got to recognise that the expression, if it's really dry and you see lots of score 4s or a few score 4s, you've got to be a bit wary that when conditions get worse, it might be a lot worse, okay? So just recognise the background environmental conditions when you're making that assessment. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you hadn't had any experience, that's where you need professional assistance to make that determination to know what to do. I mean, look, in terms of virulent foot rot, you shouldn't be selling through the yards. End of story, not negotiable. You can sell privately, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to be really careful with that. We're going to talk a bit more about benign and virulent after we split up and when we look at lesions. But it is really important to recognise when foot rot is active, the winter and spring, when foot rot needs to be controlled with foot bathing if you've got it on your farm. Summer, that's when you eradicate if you've got virulent foot rot. That's your window when it's totally dry. If it's a really wet summer, you might abandon ship and control it for a year before you get back into it. Late autumn really depends on the season. If it's a late break, you won't see much in autumn at all, and that's what's been the case here. So this year, that'd be a fair comment, wouldn't it, Jack? And certainly my observation's been very quiet this autumn. But if you get an early autumn break, sometimes late autumn can be quite active with foot rot spread. So, I mean, the control options are foot bathing. There is a vaccination option. It's not widespread at this stage. That might change soon enough. Or do nothing is not an option with highly virulent strains. We haven't got time to talk in any more detail about that. That's fine. But the foot bathing option for control over the spring for most people is what. But it's a matter of tailing how much you do, depending on the strain you've got on your property. The more virulent, the more you do. You'll get magnificent control with walking through zinc sulphate, but realistically, it's very difficult to do that on most places where you've got lambing ewes in spring and that sort of stuff too. But I think it's something for management. Jack's going to talk about eradication, but ultimately there's two options. Destocking, where you just get rid of all your sheep. That's a very costly and risky option for most people, unless it's just one small mob. It's more about inspection and culling of infected sheep and so on, which Jack will go through. And the final thing is surveillance and prevention. And look, foot rot gets on two ways onto a place. Boundary fences where stock get through, or by purchase of new sheep and you don't quarantine them. if nothing else you remember, if you buy new sheep, put them in quarantine, so no other sheep walk over ground where they've been within 7 days until they've been through spring. Obviously you can't do that with rams, individual sheep, but you inspect each one individually, okay? And I always like to inspect new sheep onto your place, because if I find of a problem when they've come onto the place, you can act there, and if you find it a month down the track, there's no way of proving where it's come from, okay?